The funny thing about modern warfare is that you're more likely to die of boredom than a bullet. The other funny thing, the truth doesn't travel by word of mouth anymore. It arrives at 3 a.m. over a satellite link that's slower than molasses in winter, served up on the glowing screen of a 5-year-old laptop. My truth had a name, Message Archive Sarah. You see, before this rotation, I had this nagging feeling, a gut instinct honed by years of learning to spot things that are just off. So I did a little digital prep work. Call it insurance. A little piece of software, totally legal if you own the device, that made a neat little copy of her digital life and sent it my way. I told myself it was for peace of mind. What a jerk I was. Peace was the last thing I was going to get. For weeks, I ignored the file. A good soldier focuses on the mission. My mission was sand, sun, and staring at the same stretch of razor wire for 12 hours a day. The air here has a smell, a mix of diesel, dust, and instant coffee that sticks to the back of your throat. It's the scent of government-funded patience. Then came the anniversary. She sent me a cheerful, heavily filtered photo of herself, raising a glass of wine to the camera. Missing you, my hero, S. I looked at that picture, then at the icon on my desktop, and I thought, screw it, for old time's sake. The first few dozen messages were exactly what you'd expect. Chats with her sister, memes from college friends, confirmations for dental appointments. I almost clicked away, feeling like a real chump for my paranoia. That's when I saw his name, Mark, their yoga instructor. Seriously? Yoga? The guy whose primary contribution to society is teaching affluent women how to breathe in overpriced pants? It started innocently enough. Great class today. Then moved to coffee sometime. And then it wasn't innocent anymore. It was paragraphs, novels, an entire secret library of a life I had no part in. My own home, described in detail by a stranger who was sleeping in my bed. He thought the painting I bought her in Florence was a bit tacky. I found myself nodding. He's not wrong, the jerk. I didn't feel rage, not at first. It was more of a cold curiosity, a professional detachment. I was just an analyst reviewing intelligence. The target's patterns were predictable. The breach in security was obvious. It was a tactical mess, sure, but an impersonal one. I kept scrolling, compiling a mental report. I took a sip of my coffee. It was cold, tasted of dirt. Right in front of me, on the wall of my small cot, was a framed photo of Sarah and me, taken on our last vacation. The two of us grinning, looking happy and annoyingly normal. In the picture, she's laughing. On the screen, she's texting Mark about how my snoring drives her crazy. I guess we all have our secrets. Was this just a classic, boring midlife crisis? A lame bummer of a story I'd have to deal with when I got back? I scrolled further down, to the more recent messages, from last week. A cold feeling spreading through my chest. Then I saw it. The message that changed everything. It wasn't about tacky art or snoring. It wasn't even about love. It was a screenshot. A picture of a lab result. And beneath it, a 5-word text from her to him that hit me harder than any roadside bomb. Positive. Looks like we did it. Positive. Looks like we did it. For a solid minute, the only sound was the low hum of the bass generator and the frantic thumping in my own ears. My training kicked in. When you walk into an ambush, you don't scream, you don't panic, you find cover, you assess the threat, and you start thinking about the counterattack. The glowing screen was the kill zone, so I minimized the window. I just sat there, staring at the blank desktop, at a generic desert landscape wallpaper that came with the laptop. It felt appropriate, barren, lifeless, hostile. My hand felt heavy. I looked down at my wedding ring, the simple platinum band. It looked alien suddenly, a piece of shrapnel from a life that blew up a few minutes ago. All those years, we tried. All the appointments, the hushed conversations, the crushing disappointment, month after month. It was our private, shared grief. And she just used the language of our grief to celebrate a victory with another man. In our bed. I had to admit, that's a level of psychological warfare I hadn't anticipated. The yoga instructor was a better strategist than he looked. Touché, Mark. What's the protocol here? Is there a field manual for when your wife doesn't just cheat, but reclassifies you from husband to liquid asset? Because this wasn't about love. People like Sarah don't throw away a 15-year investment for a fling. The pregnancy wasn't the goal. It was a tactical maneuver. Fueled by a new, colder kind of energy, I pulled the message archive back up. This time, I didn't just read. I hunted. I used the search function, a clean, surgical tool. My first search term, money. Bingo. A conversation from 2 months ago. It was Sarah talking to Mark about how things would be so much easier if they had a real nest egg to start over. She was complaining about our conservative investments. Mark, whose business history I was willing to bet was a mess, was suddenly giving financial advice, the blind leading the blind into my bank account. I scrolled through their brilliant economic theories, feeling a strange professional admiration for the sheer audacity of it all. My reflection stared back at me from the dark screen of the laptop. A hollowed-out face with tired eyes that were starting to look dangerously wired. She'd made him a partner in our life. It was a hostile takeover, and I was the obsolete CEO about to be fired from my own existence. This whole thing was a business plan, a startup with my life savings as the seed money. The baby wasn't a symbol of their love. It was their Series A funding. The rage was still absent. In its place, something far more useful was growing. Resolute. A cold, quiet, diamond-hard Resolute. This wasn't going to be a messy, tear-filled divorce. This was going to be an operation. They had a plan. Now I needed one. I typed another word into the search bar. The name of our longtime financial planner, David Chen. His name lit up the screen. Dozens of hits. My blood turned to ice. She'd been talking to him. A lot. The most recent message from her to Mark, sent just last week, was the final nail in the coffin of the man I used to be. Meeting with David is a go. We just need John's final signature. And I know exactly how to get it. She didn't wait long. A few hours after her text, my laptop buzzed. A video call request. The name Sarah flashed on the screen, nestled inside a cheerful green icon. It felt less like an invitation, more like a summons. I took a deep breath, the air still tasting of dust and stale coffee, and clicked accept. Her face appeared, a little pixelated, 1,000 miles of static and bad code between us. The perfect metaphor for our marriage. A distorted, low-resolution image of what it used to be. She launched into a master class in spousal concern. She looked tired. Her hair was a little messy. It was a calculated performance. The vulnerable, overwhelmed wife just trying to hold down the fort. John, honey, I'm so sorry to bother you, but, well, we have a bit of a disaster. She then spun a perfectly crafted piece of domestic drama. The water heater apparently had exploded, or was about to. The details were fuzzy, but the cost, she assured me, was very, very clear. A fortune. I played my part. I was the concerned, distant husband. Oh, shoot, Sarah, is everyone okay? Don't worry about the money. We'll figure it out. She almost looked relieved,
but it wasn't the relief of a wife whose husband has her back.
It was the relief of a con artist whose mark is taking the bait. "That's the thing, honey," she said, leaning closer to her camera. "I was talking to David Chen, and he had a brilliant idea." "Oh, I bet he did." Or more accurately, "I bet you did, and you just put the words in his mouth." Here came the masterstroke. She explained that to pay for this emergency, the best way was to refinance the mortgage. Interest rates were at an all-time low, she said, rattling off numbers she'd clearly memorized. It would free up cash and lower our monthly payments. It was so damn smart. She had wrapped the financial gutting of my life inside the responsible, boring shell of home maintenance. Who would ever question that? How do you say no to fixing a problem that could flood your house while also saving money? It was a checkmate move. A felony disguised as fiscal prudence. She was a natural. My own face stared back at me from a small window in the corner of the screen. I looked haggard, a ghost haunting his own life. "Whatever you think is best, Sarah," I said, the words feeling like sandpaper in my throat. "You know I trust you." The smile she gave me was dazzling. It was pure, unfiltered victory. "Oh, good. There's just one little snag. The bank needs your signature on the final authorization, since you're on the account, but it's all digital. David already set it up." She explained the next steps as if she were telling a child how to tie his shoes. The name of the bank's portal, the login credentials she'd conveniently reset for me. It was all laid out, a smooth, frictionless path to my own ruin. "Just log in and use the e-signature feature when you have a second," she said, her voice bright and cheerful. "It's all preloaded in a file called Mortgage Docs. I made it easy for you." My mouse pointer drifted across the screen, a tiny white arrow hovering in the vast emptiness of my desktop. All I had to do was follow it. Log in, click a box, and electronically authorize my own execution. The bank's login page was a masterpiece of corporate sterility. A calming blue background, a stock photo of a ridiculously happy family on a sailboat, and 2 little boxes for a username and password. This was the modern battlefield, I guess. No trenches, no razor wire, just a 2-factor authentication code sent to my phone. With the credentials Sarah had so helpfully provided, I slipped past the digital gates. I was in. The portal was a maze of bland menus, account summary, transfer funds, bill pay. And there it was, sitting in a documents requiring action folder, a single file, mortgagedocs.pdf. The glowing red dot next to it screamed for attention. The bait. I could almost smell the fresh digital paint on the trap she'd laid. A good soldier doesn't just walk into the kill zone. First, you do recon. You check the perimeter. My eyes scanned the page, my analyst brain taking over, looking for anything out of place. And I found it. A small, innocuous-looking tab at the top of the page. My Files. I clicked it. Apparently, the bank offered a convenient cloud storage solution linked to the main account. Most people probably used it to store tax returns or pictures of their dog. Sarah used it as her personal digital junkyard. And she had apparently forgotten to log out. The screen filled with folders, and the sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it made me laugh, a dry, humorless sound in the quiet room. She was so confident in my tech illiteracy, so sure I'd click the big red button like a trained monkey, that she'd left the door to her entire life wide open. It was all there. A folder named Work, filled with sensitive HR files from the consulting firm where she worked, performance reviews, salary data, layoff projections, an IT security guy's nightmare. Another folder named Mark, which I didn't even have the stomach to open, but the one that caught my eye was simply labeled Future. Inside was a meticulously detailed 5-year financial plan. It had projections for income, investments, and child support payments. It listed the value of our house, my pension, and my life insurance policy. It wasn't a dream board. It was an invoice for my entire existence.
They hadn't just planned to rob me, they had created a PowerPoint presentation about it. The tackiness was almost as offensive as the betrayal. I felt a surge of something cold and clean. Not rage, clarity. I had been worried about a mortgage refinance, about a few $100,000. I'd been thinking like a husband. But now I was looking at evidence of corporate data violations and a meticulously planned multi-pronged conspiracy to commit fraud. The game had just changed. Drastically. She thought she was a financial mastermind, a wolf. But a real wolf covers its tracks. She was just a common, careless jerk who had underestimated her target. My hands moved with a new fluid purpose. Forget the mortgage document. That was a distraction. Using the base's high-speed connection, I began a secure, encrypted download of every single file, every performance review, every confidential email, every single slide of their pathetic business plan. It took 20 minutes. 20 minutes of the most productive work I'd done in my entire career. It was a complete tactical exfiltration of her life's weak points. Then, and only then, did I look at the mortgage document she wanted me to sign. I didn't click it. I didn't touch it. I simply let it sit there, its little red dot still blinking expectantly. I closed the portal, opened my email, and sent a short, simple message. To my wife. The subject line, done. The body of the email contained only 4 words. Signed, sealed, and delivered. Signed, sealed, and delivered. For a lie, it felt remarkably true. Something had been delivered. A death warrant for the life we used to have. The immediate aftermath was a strange, buzzing calm. I knew Sarah would be checking the bank portal with the obsessive energy of a day trader watching a stock plummet. She'd log in, see that the document was still untouched, the little red dot still blinking its accusation. The lie wouldn't hold for more than a day, maybe 2. A lesser man would panic, a better man might feel remorse. I just felt clarity. My new objective was to cause as much chaos as possible before she realized I was the one pulling the strings. I was no longer a husband, I was an insurgent operating deep in enemy territory. My eyes fell on the folder I'd created on my encrypted thumb drive. Collateral, a clean professional military term. Inside, nested among the digital wreckage of our marriage, was the folder from her work files. It was a goldmine of corporate malfeasance. She hadn't just been careless, she'd been reckless. She'd used a public-facing cloud service linked to our joint bank account to store proprietary company information. It was the digital equivalent of leaving blueprints for a new stealth bomber on a coffee shop table. Her incompetence was going to be my greatest weapon. I didn't need a nuke, just a well-placed bullet. I scrolled past the performance reviews and salary data, too messy, too personal. Then I found it, a spreadsheet. Its file name was innocuous. Q4 Restructuring Projections. Inside was a detailed list of employees slated for upcoming layoffs, with notes from management, and next to several names in her own department was a column with her initials, SS, followed by comments that were a brutal mix of corporate jargon and petty personal slights. She wasn't just doing her job, she was settling scores. A new browser window, a new anonymous encrypted email address. fairnessinfinance@protonmail.com. It had just the right amount of sanctimonious whistleblower outrage. The recipient wasn't her direct boss. You don't warn a captain that his lieutenant is a traitor. You go straight to the general. A quick search on LinkedIn gave me the name and email address of her company's chief operating officer, Mr. Harrison Baylor, a man whose profile picture screamed, "I don't have time for this." The email I drafted was a model of efficiency. No long rambling story, just 3 sentences. Mr. Baylor,
As someone who values this company, I feel it is my duty to inform you of a serious data security breach. Your confidential Q4 restructuring plan appears to be in the hands of employees who are using it for personal gain. The attached file was found on a publicly accessible server. I attached the single spreadsheet, no more, no less. It was a clean, untraceable shot. Then I clicked Send. The little email vanished into the ether, a silent, invisible torpedo headed for the hull of her career. Sarah would wake up in the morning, frustrated about a delayed mortgage payment, but she would be walking into an office where her fate had already been sealed. She just didn't know it yet. I leaned back in my chair, the worn springs groaning in protest. A faint smile touched my lips. She was worried about our home. She should have been worried about her office. Waiting for the fallout felt like the minutes after a controlled demolition. You've set the charges, you've pushed the plunger, and now you're just standing there, listening to the unnatural silence, waiting for the first telltale groan of collapsing steel. For 3 days, that silence was all I had. The bank portal remained unchanged. Sarah sent 2 frantic, chirpy emails. "Hey, honey, so weird. The bank is being so slow. Did the signature go through on your end? Can you try again? XOXO." I didn't respond. I simply forwarded them to a new, encrypted address I had found for an attorney I had found online. Her name was Evelyn Reed. Her firm's tagline was Surgical Solutions. It sounded just right. On the 3rd morning, my message archive updated with a symphony of chaos. The first movement was a panicked text from Sarah to Mark. "Something is happening at work. HR is here, pulling people into meetings." A few hours later, a staccato burst of short, frantic messages. "Baylor knows. It's a shit show. They're talking about a security breach. Oh God, my files!" And then the finale. A single 2-word text that felt like music. "I'm fired." The speed of it was beautiful. Corporate America, I've learned, has its own rules of engagement, and they are swift and merciless when it comes to liability. They wouldn't bother with a long, drawn-out investigation. They would see the breach, identify the source, and amputate the limb before the infection could spread. My little anonymous email hadn't just gotten her fired, it had likely gotten her blacklisted from the entire financial sector. She just didn't know the extent of the damage yet. The second act began that evening. It was a new text thread between Sarah and her sister, a woman who had always treated me with a kind of weary condescension, like I was a golden retriever Sarah had rescued for charity. The tone was no longer triumphant, it was panicked. "I lost my job. They fired me over some bullshit security policy. It's not fair." Her sister's reply was predictable, full of misplaced fury on Sarah's behalf. But then Sarah's messages took a turn I hadn't anticipated. A new, ugly narrative began to form, like poison seeping from a wound. "It has to be John. It's the only thing that makes sense. He's trying to sabotage me." A new thought pinged in my brain, a tactical adjustment. I hadn't expected her to get there so fast. Her sister, of course, fanned the flames. "He's losing it. The army finally broke him." I kept scrolling. The conversation devolved into a detailed, carefully constructed story of me. Not the man they knew, but a new character. A broken, paranoid soldier coming home. A man capable of anything.
It was the same playbook from before. The stress pills and the unstable veteran narrative. But now it was accelerated, supercharged with the fuel of her sudden catastrophic career failure. I stood up and walked to the tiny, grime-streaked window. The desert was a deep purple in the twilight. Her attack on my reputation, my sanity, it wasn't just a divorce tactic anymore. It was her only tactic. With her career in flames, my money, my assets, my very life was her only viable path forward. This wasn't about a cushy settlement now. It was about her survival. She was backed into a corner, and a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. My initial plan to simply expose her,
felt insufficient. This was an enemy who, even when mortally wounded, was still trying to find a way to drag me down with her. This required a new level of engagement, something more personal. My gaze fell on my phone. She was building an army of sympathizers. I decided it was time to talk to one of her key lieutenants. I dialed her sister's number. Calling Sarah's sister, Jessica, was a calculated risk. For years, I had been the silent brother-in-law, the sturdy, quiet guy who smiled at family gatherings and deferred to the sisters' rapid-fire inside jokes. My silence had allowed them to write their own story about me. Now it was time to edit the script. She answered on the third ring, her voice clipped and wary. "John, is everything okay?" She sounded like she was talking to a bomb disposal robot. "Hey, Jessica. Sorry to bother you. I know it's late." I began, pitching my voice low, a cocktail of exhaustion and concern. "Listen, I just got a really strange email from Sarah." This was the key. Never accuse, always express concern. "She's not making a lot of sense. She's talking about her job, saying she got fired, and she thinks I had something to do with it? It's pretty wild stuff. I'm worried about her. Is she all right?" The effect was instantaneous. Jessica's defensive posture crumpled. I hadn't called to yell or accuse. I had called for help. I had aligned myself with her as a fellow concerned party. "Oh, John," she sighed, a wave of frustrated pity washing over the phone line. "She's not doing great. This job thing really threw her. She's saying some crazy things." "I bet," I said, my voice full of sad understanding. "Listen, I'm stuck over here, a million miles away. I feel so helpless. Has she been like this for a while? A little paranoid, erratic?" I was feeding her the very words Sarah was using against me, but I was reframing them. I wasn't the source of the paranoia, I was its victim. Jessica, who likely only ever heard Sarah's polished, self-serving version of events, now had a new, conflicting piece of intelligence, a seed of doubt. She hesitated, and in that pause I knew I had her. "Well," she started, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "she has been a bit, manic lately, very secretive, and she's spending money like crazy. New clothes, a new car. I thought it was weird." The new car. That was a detail I didn't know. It was a beautiful, unplanned bonus. The betrayed wife doesn't buy herself a new car a week after her husband deploys. The guilt-guilty fraudster, however. "A new car?" I asked, my voice a perfect blend of surprise and hurt. Shoot, I had no idea. I let the silence hang there, letting Jessica's own mind fill in the blanks. I was the good soldier, eating dirt in a foreign land, while my wife was on a spending spree, having a mental breakdown, and making wild accusations. "I am so sorry, John," she said, and for the first time it sounded genuine. "This is a mess. I think she's just overwhelmed." "I think so too," I replied, my tone gentle, forgiving. "Listen, I'm getting my orders changed. Emergency leave. I'll be home in a week. Don't tell her. I want to surprise her. I think she just needs me home. We'll sort this all out. You and I, we just need to be the calm ones, the grown-ups in the room."
"Can you do that for me?"
"Of course, John," she said, her voice full of a newfound, protective warmth. She thought she was on my team now, the loyal sister helping her troubled brother-in-law save his unraveling wife. I hung up the phone. A single, well-placed phone call had just neutralized Sarah's primary emotional support. I hadn't just sowed doubt. I'd recruited a double agent, and she didn't even know she was working for me. Sarah's narrative of the crazy veteran had just met its first major obstacle, a concerned relative who now suspected the crazy one might not be me. The home front was being prepped. If my call with Jessica was a delicate bit of social engineering, my first official video call with Evelyn Reed was a pre-mission brief with the Joint Chiefs.
She listened without a flicker of emotion as I detailed my actions, the anonymous email, Sarah's firing, the manipulation of the sister. My backdrop was a sand-colored wall and the constant hum of generators. Hers was a stark, panoramic view of the Chicago skyline. She was a hawk in a high-rise nest, and I was her operative in the field. When she finished, she didn't congratulate me. She simply took a slow sip from a heavy-looking glass of water, the ice clinking with a sharp, definitive sound. "Your moves were brilliant for an amateur, Mr. Sullivan," she said, her voice as crisp as the winter air outside her window. "But they were improvised, and improvisation creates loose ends. We don't do loose ends." She was right. I had been playing tactical whack-a-mole. Evelyn Reed was here to plan the invasion. "You have two critical assets. Asset 1 is the downloaded corporate data. The second, and far more powerful asset, is the unsigned mortgage document." I was confused. "But it's worthless. The forgery never happened." A thin, predatory smile touched her lips. "Exactly. She attempted to have you sign a document under false pretenses that would have fraudulently liquidated a marital asset for the benefit of a third party, her lover. That's conspiracy to commit fraud. It's clean, it's provable, and it carries a federal sentence." She let that sink in. She wasn't looking at a messy divorce. She was looking at a criminal case. "So we go to the police?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Evelyn almost scoffed. "God, no. We don't want a conviction, Mr. Sullivan. Convictions are messy, public, and unpredictable. We want leverage. The threat of total annihilation is infinitely more useful than the thing itself." This was a new level of warfare. I had been fighting with a knife. She had just unveiled a nuclear arsenal. She laid out the plan. It was so simple, so utterly ruthless, it made my own petty schemes look like child's play. She was going to draft a post-nuptial agreement, an amicable separation document. The agreement would be quite straightforward. Sarah would voluntarily waive any and all claims to your pension, your personal savings, or any future earnings, and the house. She will assume all marital debts. In exchange, you will agree to not press federal charges for conspiracy to commit fraud, and a gag order will prevent either of you from ever discussing the details of your separation. We will offer her a one-time relocation payment of $5,000. $5,000 for 15 years of marriage. It was a brutal, crushing insult, disguised as a transaction. I just stared at her, this elegant shark in her glass tower. The plan was perfect. Sarah, now jobless and in debt with a baby on the way, would be presented with two doors. Behind door number 1 was a swift, silent, humiliating exit with just enough cash to rent a U-Haul. Behind door number 2 was a team of FBI agents and a decade in prison, leaving her baby to be raised by Mark, the broke yoga instructor. It wasn't a choice. It was a kill shot.
"By the time your plane lands," Evelyn concluded, "I'll have the document ready. It will be sent to the hotel where your final meeting will take place. Your job, soldier, is to create the perfect environment for her to sign it. She must walk into that room believing she is being handed a victory, only to find she is signing the terms of her unconditional surrender." The flight home was a 20-hour journey through a twilight zone of recycled air and bad coffee. It gave me too much time to think. Was this right? Was this just? Evelyn Reed's plan was a legal masterpiece, a sterile, bloodless annihilation. But the thought of it left a strange, metallic taste in my mouth. My initial goal was justice, but this felt different. It felt personal. And it wasn't enough. The thought of her simply signing a paper,
Getting a check and slinking off into a new, anonymous life with a slap on the wrist felt profoundly unsatisfying. A criminal might be scared of prison. A narcissist, however, is terrified of something else entirely: irrelevance, public humiliation. My objective shifted. I wasn't just going to defeat her, I was going to erase her. My surprise homecoming was a carefully orchestrated piece of theater. Per my instructions, Jessica picked me up from the airport. The reunion with Sarah at the front door was an awkward, tearful mess, my feigned exhaustion playing perfectly against her feigned relief. Our house, the one I had left just months before, felt like a stranger's home. The air smelt different, of a new brand of scented candle, sickly sweet and cloying, a faint odor of vanilla and lies. Everything was the same but tilted just slightly off kilter. The new, ridiculously expensive espresso machine on the counter, the generic, soulless, abstract print that had replaced our wedding photos on the living room wall. Each change was a small, silent testament to her betrayal. We played our parts for 2 agonizing days. I was the distant, emotionally fragile husband. She was the patient, worried wife. In hushed tones, she'd talk about how good it was that I was home, how worried she'd been. And in an act of breathtaking gall, she even booked us an appointment for couples therapy. A Zoom session, of course, for convenience. This, I realized, was to be her stage. She'd get me in front of a neutral third party, a professional witness to my decline, and she'd perform her masterpiece of concern. This was her final play, and it gave me the perfect idea for my own. The morning of the therapy session, I made a special trip. Mark's yoga studio, Serenity Now, was in a trendy, upscale strip mall nestled between a gluten-free bakery and a store that sold $1,000 handbags for chihuahuas. It was even more pathetic in person. I didn't go in, I just sat in my rental car, watching. Right on schedule, an expensive, brand-new SUV, a model I knew for a fact my salary couldn't afford, pulled into a reserved spot. A woman I'd never seen before, maybe 10 years older than Sarah, with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a face stretched tight with ambition, stepped out. She was greeted at the studio door by Mark with a kiss that was far too familiar for a simple student-teacher relationship. A quick check of public records on my phone confirmed it. The SUV was registered to Mark's other major investor, his primary source of funding, before Sarah decided to pitch in. His other woman. Armed with this new piece of intelligence, I headed home for the therapy session. Sarah was already set up in her home office, her face a mask of anxious sincerity. The therapist, a kindly-looking woman with large glasses, appeared on screen. The session began, and I let Sarah talk. For 20 glorious, uninterrupted minutes, she painted a portrait of a long-suffering saint, a woman terrified of her husband's instability. She talked about my moods, my distance, my paranoia. She was brilliant. She was convincing. She almost had me believing her.
When she finished, there were actual tears in her eyes. The therapist looked at me, her face full of gentle pity. It was my turn to speak, and I knew exactly what I was going to say. It had nothing to do with us. It had everything to do with a little business called Serenity Now. The therapist turned her pity-filled gaze on me through the screen. "John," she began gently, "it's clear Sarah is feeling a great deal of distress. How do you respond to what she shared?" I leaned forward, my face calm, my voice even. I didn't look at Sarah. I looked directly into the camera, as if I were speaking only to the therapist. I respond by saying that Sarah is a brilliant woman. I said, my tone laced with a sincere, almost admiring quality. She's ambitious, a forward thinker, and I've always supported her ventures. Sarah's tear-streaked face registered confusion. This was not the angry defensive reaction she'd anticipated. Take her most recent investment, a local wellness startup, Serenity Now, a very promising brand. As a supportive husband, I've naturally been doing my own due diligence from afar. You know, market research. Sarah's face began to tighten. Her eyes, which had been so full of performative sadness, were now sharp with dawning horror. She knew. She knew that I knew, but she didn't know how much I knew. And my research, I went on, my voice dropping into a colder, more clinical tone, has uncovered a significant structural weakness in the company's business model. It appears the primary financial backing is over-leveraged. You see, the owner, a Mr. Mark Anderson, has the tendency to secure multiple large investments from multiple partners, all of whom believe they are the sole major backer. For example, I'm sure Sarah would be fascinated to learn about the investment portfolio of a woman named Catherine Almont. She drives a lovely new Land Rover. According to public records, she's the primary leaseholder on the studio's commercial property. I also happened to observe her this morning sharing a rather affectionate greeting with Mr. Anderson right at his studio door. The kind of affection one might mistake for something other than a simple instructor-client relationship. The therapist stared, utterly lost. But Sarah understood perfectly. I wasn't talking to the therapist anymore. I was delivering a damage report directly to her, detailing the complete and utter failure of her escape plan. I had not only exposed her affair, I had exposed her as a chump, one of many. I had reduced her great romance to a cheap, common scam. Her face, which had been a mask of calculated sorrow, simply shattered. It was a stunning thing to watch. The color drained away, leaving a pasty, slack-jawed void. The confident, ruthless corporate raider was gone, replaced by the pathetic, broke, unemployed, and pregnant mistress of a third-rate yoga instructor who was playing her for a fool. The therapist finally found her voice. I don't think I understand what this has to do with—" I held up a hand, silencing her. "It has everything to do with stress, doctor," I said calmly, "and the irrational financial and personal decisions it can lead to. Speaking of which," I glanced at the time, right on cue. "Sarah," I said, my voice now devoid of any emotion whatsoever, "I believe you just received an email." She fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking. On my own screen, I could see the notification preview pop up. The sender, Evelyn Reed. The subject, Terms of Separation Agreement. I stood up from the chair. "I believe this session is over," I said to the bewildered face of the therapist on the screen. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't look at Sarah one last time. I simply walked over to the laptop, my footsteps the only sound in the room, and closed the lid. The screen went dark, severing the connection, leaving her alone in the digital wreckage of the life she thought she had built. The account was settled.